Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr,
business consultant.
Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr Business Consulting.
Hey, everybody. I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We build solid foundations for service-based businesses to grow and scale and achieve the results and success they deserve. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Mark Twain said, "And what is a man without energy? Nothing at all." Well, in today's episode, we get energized and discuss the topic of energy, the fuel that drives your success and gives you the power to achieve your potential, why you should be prioritizing and managing this resource, how to go from energy poverty to energy abundance, and more. Our guest is a husband and father, a personal development entrepreneur, an award-winning life coach and business strategist, keynote and public speaker, and author of the new book, Energize. His list of clients includes Salesforce, Google, DocuSign, Virgin, and Canon. And he's been featured in Forbes, Harvard Business Review, Huffington Post, Financial Times, and many other media outlets. Please welcome the man who's helping people awaken their imagination of what's truly possible so they can live a better story with more meaning and purpose, Simon Alexander Ong. Simon, it is great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Jay, thank you so much for having me, for that kind introduction. And I think I'm going to have to hire you to introduce me whenever I speak on stage.
It would be my honor. You just carry me around and plant me where you need me, and let's go. Well, I've got to tell you, I love all of the guests that we have on this show. There are certain guests that stand out for a number of reasons. Could be the topic, it could be their backstory. Researching you it really has been a life-changing experience for me. And I've really been so excited about this conversation that we're going to have today in the book that you've brought to life. So let's dive right in. The first thing that I wanted to find out from you is what your favorite trait is about yourself.
If I had to pick one favorite trait, because a couple have just sprung to my mind, Jay, but if I had to pick one, it is the love of relationship building. The love of relationship building. I love expanding, growing, and nurturing my network, not just because it opens the space for beautiful conversation, but it also allows me to see how I can collaborate with other people, how I can help other people. And from those conversations, it also allows me to see how I can impact the world in a more powerful way. And it reminds me, that question, Jay, of something I was asked recently about what made me stand out above other coaches and speakers in my space. And I said to this individual, I consciously did not spend a huge amount of time around fellow coaches and speakers when I first started. I wanted to have an element of diversification in my environment. And so I would want to spend time with the likes of film directors or musicians or bartenders, tech entrepreneurs, people in finance, people in the cooking industry, because the reason I have this love of relationships is that the more diversified our environment is, the more diversified our inputs are. And that's what breathes oxygen into our creativity and ability to innovate.
Wow, what a beautiful response and a great way of setting yourself up and structuring yourself where you're surrounding yourself with that type of diverse input and not wanting to necessarily be influenced by one certain type of individual or coach, having all those different incredible ingredients and personalities and experiences and conversations be part of who you are so you can show up as your best self as a coach. I think that's that's quite remarkable. I think we could all benefit from doing more of that and not surrounding ourselves with people who are just like we are, but people who bring different perspectives and different experiences. So I thank you for sharing that. I love that. So I would love it if we could turn the clock back a bit, and for all of our listeners and viewers who would love to get some context around the work that you do today, the book Energize that you've written, tell us a bit about your backstory with really a focus on some key lessons that you learned and maybe a few examples of some things that shaped who you are today.
Sure. So I was born in the United Kingdom to Malaysian Chinese parents. And I had grown up with this mistaken belief that success was defined by the job title that you had after graduation. So if you were a banker, a doctor, a lawyer, or an accountant, you would be seen as successful by the family, by your close friends, and by society. And so I followed that path and ended up going to university to study economics. Unfortunately, Jay, the time that I graduated to begin a career in the financial services industry was probably the worst possible time to do so, because it was the middle of 2007, a year before the global financial crisis really took hold. And the company I decided to begin my career with was Lehman Brothers, which collapsed in September 2008. Now, before the financial crisis, Jay, I had this hope of working hard, moving up the corporate ladder, and then deciding maybe a few years later what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. So when this occurred, it was, as you can imagine, a very painful experience. You know, all those hopes and dreams suddenly swept away from under your feet. But in hindsight, it was a beautiful blessing in disguise, because it kick-started the longest journey that we humans make, the inches from our heads to our heart. Never an easy journey, but the most important and fulfilling that we will ever embark on. And that's really where the catalyst of my journey started, because it got me questioning those beliefs that I'd held for so long, growing up as a child through my teenage years and into adulthood, that I had to be one of those jobs in order to be successful. And so I used a time when I was out of work to reflect on questions such as, what did success mean to me? What did fulfillment look like? And what sort of impact did I want to have in the world? Now, while these are simple questions, they are also questions that very few of us take time to explore. And that's why I think that most of us are exhausted. That's why I was exhausted, especially after the financial crisis, going from job to job to job. Because what I realized is that we're exhausted not because we're doing too much, but because very often we are running someone else's race. We are measuring ourselves against metrics determined by other people. And until we take back control on what those definitions are for ourselves, it's a game that we can't win. And so for me, that's the background of what led me to really exploring what I wanted to do, to deepen that connection and relationship with my true self so that I could turn those insights into my guide.
So let's talk then about the questions that you were asking yourself at that point. And, you know, as you're telling me the story, I can imagine others who are listening to this, and I've been through some similar, maybe not exactly the same, but some similar experiences before, and had to really do some deep soul searching, asking myself some very, very important and deep questions. So this is how you started this journey. You're asking yourself questions about fulfillment, success, impact. What were the answers that you were coming up with at that time as you were asking these questions of yourself?
Sure. So when I first started asking myself those questions, I didn't have all of the answers. And I think very often we don't, especially when you've not done this sort of exercise before. But I started to have a few ideas that came to my mind, things such as success meant for me freedom. I didn't feel like at the time I had that freedom, because when I wasn't in a job, I felt like I had to get a job. I had to earn money. And as long as I was always in the hunt for another job and at the mercy of my employers, I didn't feel I had that freedom. And so freedom became something that was important to me when I was brainstorming my answers to those questions. Fulfillment for me became about time with my loved ones, time with my family, time doing the things that made me happy. And that was important for me, asking that second question, because I slowly realized, Jay, that there was a difference between success and fulfillment. Because what I saw working in the financial industry is that so many people looked successful to the eyes of the outside audience, but actually they were not feeling fulfilled. So they may look successful, but they hated what they were doing. And so that's why I split that into two questions, success and fulfillment, because they can mean very different things. And then impact for me started to become about legacy. And that's what started the thinking process about the value that I could bring into the world. Because I think when I was at university, Jay, and I was looking at the job market and getting into a graduate position after university, I was focused on what I would call career virtues. Which company did I want to work for? What job did I want to have? How much money did I want to earn? How much bonus did I want to get paid? But by looking at that question of the impact I wanted to have in the world, it became a lot about softer things, such as inspiration, such as living a story that would inspire other people, transforming the lives of other people so they can go on to live their best story. And I realized that suddenly my energy was moving away from holding up these career virtues as aspirations to actually focusing on legacy virtues, the things that people will actually remember you for. And so this really got me excited, Jay, as I was starting to brainstorm. And as I said, I didn't have all the answers straight away. We never do. Just like we never know the entire map when we begin a new journey. But we just take those small steps forward. We start with that first bullet point, that first insight, that first idea. And as we take those small steps forward, what happens is that more of the map begins to unravel itself to us. What is the right path? What is the wrong path? What is the lesson? What is the guide to the next step? And that can only happen when we begin taking small steps forward.
So true. It reminds me of the Martin Luther King Jr. quote. I may butcher this, but it's basically that often we have to take the first step in faith. We may not see the entire staircase. We just have to take the first step. And it sounds like this is exactly what you were doing. While you were asking these questions, going through this process, were you working with, did you have a mentor? Did you have a coach? Did you have an advisor? Was anyone helping you along this part of the journey?
Sure. In the beginning, I had no mentor and no coaches. It wasn't until 2014, when I had just completed my certifications in coaching, that I started to look for a mastermind group, coaches and mentors. When these ideas first started, Jay, I was in my second job after Lehman Brothers. And at that moment, it was still just ideas and things I was exploring. And I actually got involved in two businesses before I started on the coaching and speaking journey. Those two businesses never took off, both in the food industry. And while they didn't take off, they also taught me many lessons. But I would say what helped in shifting my environment, and it's something I share in my book, is leveraging the concept of an MBA. Now, an MBA is not a business school qualification. An MBA stands for Mentor Board of Advisors. So as I started slowly changing my environment, which began with the books I read, what I watched and what I listened to, I started to become aware of people that inspired me, thought leaders, successful business owners, entrepreneurs, sports people. And what I did is whenever I had a challenge or a big question to answer or a decision to make, I would choose 6 to 8 people that had positively influenced me, dead or alive. And I would go into my mind, imagine myself entering a boardroom, pulling out a chair and seeking the counsel of these individuals. And that's what I did in the early stages, because I didn't think about hiring a coach or mentor at the beginning. For me, it was slowly changing the environment first, because I was at the time spending most of my working week with people in finance. I would go drinking with people in finance after work, and I would spend time on the weekend with people in finance. And so starting that shift with the books, what I watched, what I listened to design my MBA was really where it started, but also the lesson of how powerful our environment is.
That is such a powerful lesson, and what an amazing exercise that we can all apply as well, creating our own mental board. And I love that, mental board of advisors. So to go back for just a moment, and then I want to ask you about some of those books, some of the material that you were listening to, if you could share a little bit about that as well for our listeners. But I want to go back to the 2 businesses that you were involved in the food industry. You mentioned that they didn't work out, but there were some lessons, some very valuable lessons that you learned through that process. What are some of those lessons that you learned that would be applicable today?
Sure. I think the first lesson I learned is that you've really got to do something that you can imagine yourself doing for the rest of your life. Now, to give you some context, the first business I did was an MLM opportunity. I very quickly learned from that it was not something I could see myself doing for the rest of my life. The only reason I was involved in that is because I was pursuing the monetary benefit. They sold it as, do this opportunity and you can earn a great passive income. And so I very quickly realized after a few months of being involved in it that actually I shouldn't be doing this just for the money, because it's not something I can see myself doing for the long term. The second business was designing a platform similar to Airbnb, but instead of matching people with homes, we were looking to match people who were interested in food to dine at people's homes, where those who enjoy cooking would cook a meal and people could sit on the dinner table and socialize. Now, my wife and I, who were involved in that, very much enjoyed that. We got to meet some amazing people. We got to see some incredible cooks put together food and great communities built. But then we realized it wasn't scalable, because once we paid the cooks, once we took a bit off the ticket price, you had to do a lot of events in order to make anything close to a profit. And so for the hours it demanded and the energy required, we just couldn't see ourselves doing it forever. And so we passed it on to someone else a couple of years after starting it. And then it wouldn't be long after that, Jay, before I started my coaching journey.
Interesting. Well, thank you for sharing those lessons. And then let's talk briefly about the books that you were consuming at that point, the information, the things that you were listening to. Give us an idea of maybe a few of those book titles or some things that you were listening to that helped you out tremendously, that inspired you, and that also planted the seeds that you needed at that time to grow into the person who you've become.
Sure. So the 2 books that really got me started in terms of thinking differently, but also in terms of questioning my beliefs and what could be possible, was Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, was the first one. And the second was The Magic of Thinking Big by David Schwartz. Those 2 are timeless classic books, books that I have revisited again and again and again, And it was Think and Grow Rich that first opened my mind to the idea of a mastermind group. And I mentioned earlier that in 2014, 2015, I joined my first mastermind group. And it was very much a result of understanding the impact I could have from reading Napoleon Hill's book. And the universe works in mysterious ways, Jay. I was at a birthday event, and this guy called Mark comes up to me, and we have a conversation. And at this time, I'm still working in a 9-to-5 job. I'm looking at branching out into coaching, but I'd not quite started yet. And we have this deep conversation about life wisdom and philosophy and lessons. And he really likes my energy. And he said, Simon, I know you haven't started your path on entrepreneurship yet, but I would like to invite you to a mastermind group that I'm putting together. And it will last about 3 to 4 months this summer. And I'd love to have you down for the first meeting to see what you think. And I was thinking, wow, did he know I just read Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, and mastermind groups was something I was actively looking for? And so I said yes. And that was my first exposure to being around people who were way ahead of me at the time, Jay, and seeing the impact that can have on our mindset.
Yeah, very, very powerful. That's amazing. So Think and Grow Rich is one of those books that I refer to on a regular basis. I have it on the shelf right over here. And I couldn't agree with you more in terms of not only the impact of the book and how relevant it is today after all these years, but also the power of the mastermind, being around other people who have been there before, who are further down the road than you, who are interested in your success as well. And amazing things begin to happen. But I love the story, how you met this gentleman, Mark, right after you read the book. I think that's perfect. But it's a great example that these things happen, right? It's not coincidence. Once we open our eyes to the opportunities are all around us. We just have to be tuned into them. And that sounds like it's exactly what happened in your particular case. So what a great story.
Definitely, Jay. It reminds me of the popular saying of, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And that was very much speaking to that.
Well, it's funny that you bring that up. I've shared this before. The very first time that I read Think and Grow Rich, I'll be candid with you, it didn't resonate with me. I read it from cover to cover. It was years and years ago, but I wasn't ready for it. It goes to the point that you just made, that there are often times that we will come in contact with an individual, with a book, with a message. And if we're not ready for it at that point, it may not necessarily have the impact that it can or that it may at a later point in our life. And I needed to grow more. I needed more experience. And we're always in a state of change. And I just hadn't experienced enough at that stage in my life to be able to receive it the way that I needed to, and the way that I have at this point. And quite frankly, the reason that I read it on a regular basis and refer to it each year is because I'm a different person each time I read it. So it's something different. I read something different. I take the information in differently, if that makes sense.
Definitely. And I think that's why those books, which are powerful in the messages that they have in them, are so important to read again and again and again. Because as you say, Jay, when we embark on the path of personal development, it is accepting that we are forever a work in progress. We are always evolving, we're always changing. And as each year passes, what resonates with us from a particular book will change, because we all go through different phases and seasons in our life. And so, for example, when I first read Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, the stuff that he spoke about with regards to family and parenting did not resonate with me. But now I'm a parent myself. When I reread that book, suddenly it's like gold. It's like it's speaking to me now as a parent. And so, because I've grown and evolved in different ways, when I reread certain books, suddenly I feel like new things are popping out at me.
I can definitely feel you on that. Absolutely relatable. So when it comes to your coaching work and getting into coaching, your wife, Laurie, played an integral role in introducing you to a program that she found that actually became a catalyst for you going down the path of coaching. Can you tell us about that?
I mean, first of all, she has been incredible in this journey. I mean, there's a very good reason why when you open my book, you will see it's dedicated to her, because she has been such an influential force in me going from working in the corporate world to what I'm doing today. And I remember when I first spoke to her and I shared with her my thoughts about coaching. You know, before I entered it professionally, I'd only ever done coaching as a bit of a hobby. When I was at university, while most people made their pocket money by working in department stores or working for local retailers, I made my money as a student at university by helping people land jobs in the city. So jobs in finance, jobs in consulting, jobs in the legal industry. And there was a guy who was running this company, and he thought that I presented myself well. And so I only did this for some pocket money on the sides. And I revisited the idea of coaching when those first two businesses didn't work out. And I said to Laurie, you know, I really enjoyed coaching when I was working with these students, but I don't know if it's something that would give me a full-time income. You know, is it really something that I could develop a career in? Or is it just something I can help people from time to time? And so Laurie was scrolling through her social media one weekend, and on her Facebook feed, she saw this advert for an event going on in London, a 2-day seminar that was free to attend. And so the only thing I would give up was my time. And with nothing to lose, I said, sure, I'll go along and check it out. And I went in with an open mind, Jay, on that Saturday morning. And by the time I came out on Sunday afternoon, I was saying to Laurie, you know, I think I'm going to sign up for those two courses, because it's really opened my mind. And I think that I can actually do a good job in coaching other people. And so I signed up within a few weeks to their programs. And that's how my knowledge of the coaching industry started to deepen.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. What is your favorite aspect of coaching? If you had to narrow it down to, let's say, 2 or 3 key items, what is it about coaching other individuals that just fills you up?
For me, it's seeing the realization on their face that there is always a different way to see an event or an experience. Because I think that when we live our lives, we can fall into the trap of thinking there's only one reality. But in fact, there's customized reality. So, you know, the way you interpret an event might be different to the way I do, different to the way my partner does, and so on. So when people understand that there is no good or bad, happy or sad, but there is whatever I make of it. And actually, I can begin to shape reality into one that works for me rather than against me. And to see their eyes light up, to know that they have a greater power than they give themselves credit for, that for me gives me butterflies. Whether that's a question or a realization or a story they've shared or a moment of quiet in which they have that eureka moment, that for me is the greatest reward in the job that I do.
I can see that. I definitely can. So I'd love to shift to your latest book, Energize. And I'm so excited for you as an author in bringing this book to life, and for all of us and for those to come who will have the opportunity to read this book, experience it, learn from you, and be able to apply the valuable lessons that you share in the book. So before we actually dig into some of the key big ideas, share with us a bit about the writing process. What was it like for you? Do you enjoy writing? And what was if there were any challenging aspects to it for you, what were they, and how did you break through?
Firstly, writing, I thoroughly enjoyed it. But more importantly, even though I enjoyed it, Jay, it is without a shadow of a doubt the most challenging thing I have ever done. And there's a number of reasons why. Because in April 2020, my wife and I became parents for the first time, just as the United Kingdom was going into its first national lockdown. And then a few weeks later, I get an email from Penguin Random House saying that they would like to move to offer stage. So we were now in advanced stages of finalizing a book deal. Now, I knew that once that deal would go through, it would be the most challenging couple of years coming up. And that's because not only was I now writing a 65,000 word book, I was having to adapt my business in a world in which COVID challenged nearly every single human on this planet. I was raising a child in which both sides of our families were not able to travel because they both live abroad. And in which my wife and I, my wife is also an entrepreneur, we both had to adapt our businesses. You know, I get a significant income from speaking, Jay. And so the moment that it was announced that the country was going into its first lockdown, immediately we couldn't have in-person events. And so things were either postponed or cancelled. And so all of this was going on just as I was signing the contract for the book. And so the journey was a lot more challenging than I had anticipated. I'd imagined that, you know, before COVID, before becoming a parent, that if I was to write a book one day, I would sit down, cup of tea in hand, nice clean desk, laptop with the view of the outside nature behind me. But in reality, it was finding any pockets of time when my child was asleep that I could put my head together and write my book. And so there were moments in which I didn't feel I could finish the book. There were moments where I didn't feel I could get to the end. But I became, I think, a better person from persisting, persevering, and navigating what was very, very challenging circumstances.
So did you have, once the discussion started to turn up and it became crystal clear that you are going to write this book and that you made the decision to do so, did you have a specific plan in place or a process that you had decided upon in terms of, let's just say, I'm going to write every day, I'm going to write a certain number of words, I'm going to write in this location at home? But so what was that like for you? Was there a process to your or a method that you decided upon?
Sure. So there was a high level process. So what I mean by this is I had structured like a project management plan, the areas that were most important to focus on before the writing. Because from the research I did and fellow authors that I'd spoken to, I learned that the writing always comes easier once you've got everything else in place. Now, when I'm talking about everything else, I mean things such as your research, your references, your structure, your narrative, the chapter orders, the part orders. Once you've got those things all mapped out, the writing becomes very easy because you now know where things fit in and how things connect. And so that's what I started doing. So that was a process I had. Now, the research took a bit longer than I anticipated, again, because it was managing time to do that, plus changing nappies and putting my daughter to bed and everything that comes with being a parent. And so I had to manage that in a very ad hoc way, the shift between research to structure to writing. And it was very fluid. It didn't go completely to plan how I wanted. But again, that is often life. You know, not everything will go to plan the way we hope. And so once I started writing, I thought I can always edit later. but I can't edit a blank page. I can always edit things that I've written down. So a couple of months in, I just thought, okay, I'm going to research, but I'm going to write in parallel. I'm just going to do this thing in parallel, because at least I'm going to feel like I've got momentum, that I've got something behind me. And then what I did, Jay, is just to motivate me even more, I connected with some other authors who are around the same stage as I was. And I said, why don't we jump on a Zoom, and we can turn our audio off, but just the very fact that we can see each of us writing will motivate us to persist and to write those words or those pages that we want to do each day. And so I started using that on a regular basis. And it was like going to a gym class, and the moment you feel like giving up, getting off the treadmill or putting your weights down, and you see other people in that class still going, it had that same effect, Jay. It made me energized to keep pushing and getting to the end of this process.
What a brilliant idea. I love that. So you finish writing the book, and I'm blessed to have the opportunity to speak with many, many well-known authors. And one of the through lines that I often hear, it's not 100% of the time, but it's common, is that the book they wrote was the book that they needed for themselves at that time. Is that similar at all for you in terms of experience or not?
Yes, I can very much resonate with that sentiment, because I think when you're writing a book, especially at the time that I was writing a book, where you couldn't really meet people in person, and so you could only stay at home, and the only other person that was looking at it were the people in my accountability group, my mentor, my coaches, and my wife. And so at points, the writing journey can feel a little lonely. And so as you write, it almost feels like you're speaking to yourself. Because when, I don't know if you get these feelings as well, Jay, or other authors do, but when I write, I almost feel like I'm speaking the words out loud in my mind. And so as I write, it's almost like I'm educating myself, or I'm trying to speak to myself from what I'm writing. And so I can really resonate with that fact that the book that we're writing in that moment is the book that we kind of need to read through and learn from ourselves.
It's extraordinary to me. It truly is. So you have done some incredibly unique and creative things with the launch of this book. I don't want to take anything away. I would love for you to share with us some of the things that you have done.
I have really enjoyed the book marketing and campaign process. Now, when people run businesses, often it's a small team, or in many cases, it's just you. And so you are often taking on many roles within a business. And there'll be some areas that you naturally prefer more than others. And for me, it's always been the marketing, the PR, and the branding side of it. So when it got to planning this out, I was like a kid in a candy shop. I was like, I've got this idea, I've got that idea. I want to collaborate with this people, with this brand. And I think what really helps me in building this roadmap, Jay, goes back to that one trait that I shared at the beginning of this conversation of what I love the most, which is that diversity of input, that diversity in my environment. And so I was meeting people all the time and putting out ideas on maybe we could do this and maybe we could do that. And the first thing that I put forward was to a guy called Agostino Peroni, and he heads up the world's best bar at London's Connaught Hotel, which in itself is one of the world's most prestigious hotels. And I remember sharing the book with him, and we came up with this idea of how cool it would be for him to come up with a recipe for an energized cocktail inspired by the book that people could order at the bar when they visit. And it was incredible. We shot this video in the champagne bar. He came up with this recipe, and then now he serves the cocktail on a copy of the book. And I was like, wow. I mean, that was so unique to have a book inspired cocktail that you can order at the world's best bar. So that's one of the ideas we did. And suddenly, Jay, that opened me up to the hospitality industry. You know, that wasn't really my target market, but now because he shared it on his social media, I had people from the restaurant industry, the hotel industry, the bar industry, suddenly following me on social media and curious about the work that I was doing. And then I've got a friend that directs films for the BBC. And sitting with him, Jay, I was inspired about how films are released. You know, when you go to the cinema before the main feature film is on, you will have a series of film trailers. And if the trailer has done its job, you want to come back to the cinema when it's fully released. And so I sat down and said to my videographer, how cool will it be if we put together a book video trailer, taking some of the content we have and putting my voiceover on a passage of the book on this video. And then we uploaded it onto YouTube and we started sharing it. And so when people invited me to speak in a Q&A for their book club or their company or organization, I would send them that video and they would play that before I was due to speak. And the excitement and the energy it created before I even uttered a single word, Jay, was incredible. And just a final one to throw in a hat, because there's so many I can touch on. But the third one I'm going to share is the Web3 community. I have a few friends in the Web3 community, and one guy said to me, Simon, have you thought about doing a book launch in the Metaverse? Now, I had no clue about the Metaverse and this VR world. And so I was fascinated to explore what would be possible. And so after the official book launch in person, we scheduled a time in a diary to hold one of the world's first book launches in the Metaverse. So there was me this one afternoon, Jay, with an Oculus headset, with these devices on my hands, in a virtual stage, speaking to people across, I think we had about 12 different countries present in that room, engaging with them as if we were there physically, but we were actually there virtually. And it was such a unique experience that was so much fun to be a part of.
Just remarkable. Really some brilliant ideas. And we'll link to each of the three that you mentioned in the show notes, because it is so creative. And I remember when I saw the video for the first time of the Energize cocktail. First of all, it's beautifully shot, but the way the drink is put together, and it's so artistic and beautifully done. And then the trailer is incredible too. The Metaverse, if any of you that are listening and watching have never seen one of these before, and obviously, Simon, the one that you did was one of the world's first, you've got to see these. It really is a remarkable space, and something that I believe we're certainly going to see growing and becoming more and more part of our consciousness. And what a cool way to connect with people from all over the world in a space where they can see you, they can ask questions, you're animated. It just is so cool. So kudos to you. What a beautiful way to launch that book.
Jay. And you know, it was incredible. And it got me thinking, because I'm very much, and I think most of us have to be when you're running a business, I'm very much a futurist as well, in terms of trying to see how things will change in the business world. And when I finished that Metaverse event, it got me thinking, imagine I was to hold some of my one-to-one coaching in the Metaverse if my client is living abroad. So let's say I've got a client in New York, and he messages me and he says, Simon, I'm going for a particularly stressful week. It'll be good to share some of this with you in our session. Imagine I said to him, let's jump into the Metaverse. We put on our Oculus and I create a surrounding in which we're on a beach next to an ocean, sounds of seagulls around us, voices in the distance. the wind sounds in the background, and we have two chairs facing each other, and we have a powerful, deep conversation in that environment in the virtual world. And it got me thinking about how powerful that would be for the human mind.
Incredible. What a beautiful idea. I believe that you will make that happen. Absolutely. So, a couple of things. First, would you be open to coming back for round 2, where we actually delve into and deep dive a bit more into the book, some of the key learnings that we can share with our audience?
Definitely. I would be open to that, Jay.
Beautiful. Simon, I wanted to ask you a couple of quick questions before we wrap up. First, what challenge would you like to leave our audience with?
The one challenge I would leave your audience with is, from this conversation that Jay and I have had, and perhaps the notes that you've written down, what one action will you commit to apply immediately? Because having a bias to action is one of the greatest skills that you can cultivate if you want to experience success. It's constantly collapsing that gap between idea and action, because the longer that gap is, well, the less we're going to learn, the less we're going to experience momentum, the less we're really going to see what we're made of. But if we collapse that gap between insight, idea, and action, what happens is that now we're starting to understand what is the right path, what works for us, what doesn't work for us. And that's why clarity can only come from action.
So good. All right, my friends, take Simon up on that challenge. It's a good one. And I'd love to hear from you. I'd love for you to be able to share with us what that challenge is, what you're working on. So share that in the comments, if you will. And whatever I receive, I'll make sure that I share that with Simon too. So, Simon, here's my final question to you. And by the way, I have all of your social links. I'll make sure that we put all of that in the show notes to your website, your book, and all the wonderful things that you're doing. So my final question to you is this: what's one of the most difficult decisions that you've had to make in the pursuit of who you've become?
One of the most difficult decisions I had to make, and it's a fairly recent one actually, is basically to not take on any more coaching clients for, it was nearly 7 or 8 months. And this goes back and speaks to the challenge I had when writing the book, because I knew that the book campaign was going to require a lot of energy and time. I was already predicting that I was going to be invited to radio interviews, television interviews, magazine features, speaking at companies and so on. So I needed the space, the time, and the energy to commit to that. And so the decision I made was to not take on any more coaching clients, and then to slowly wind down some of them from December 2021 until July 2022. And it wasn't a decision I knew was going to work or not, because I was basically saying no to income coming in from that avenue for dedicating that time to making this book as much a success as possible. And so that was very challenging for me at the time, because I didn't know how that was going to play out. And interestingly enough, it's resulted in my business model almost completely shifting, Jay. So when I first started, I spent around 80% of my time doing one-to-one coaching and 20% everything else. Following the book, because of the decision I took there, my revenue is now around 60 to 70% from speaking, and the rest from everywhere else. And again, it wasn't by design, but it was because I needed that time to make the book a success. Now I'm finding I'm getting a lot of speaking opportunities on the back of the book being out in the world, that actually I don't need all those clients that I had before. I can still take them on now, because I said from July I'm going to open up again, but I'm now not dependent on that as much as I was before. And so the business model itself has evolved as a result of making that decision.
Very interesting. Do you, in general, do you find it difficult to say no?
I think I find it a lot easier now than I used to, Jay. I think when you are ambitious and you want to accomplish a lot, then you also you understand that yes can sometimes lead to things that you may not have predicted. But at the same time, what I've also learned in the journey of writing a book and building the business the way it is today is that I must say no in order to have the energy to focus on what's really going to move me forward. And I've been getting a lot better at that. And I've certainly been seeing the impact of that, especially in the last year.
Terrific. Well, that's an area that I continue to work on myself. So you've shared some very valuable lessons here. Simon, I want to share with you how grateful I am, reason for the shirt, how grateful I am for you joining me today on Business Minds Coffee Chat, sharing with all of our viewers, our listeners, your wisdom, your backstory, some key lessons learned. And I'm excited about this relationship. I can't wait for part 2, where we talk about Energize and really dig into the book. But I want to thank you so much for being here today. And again, I truly am grateful for you.
Jay, my pleasure. I'm grateful for this opportunity to share with your audience and looking forward to part 2.
Outstanding. And for all of you, thank you so very much for watching and listening. Do us a favor, if you will. Please subscribe, rate the show, and leave us a review. We would love that. That goes a long, long way. Let us know what resonated with you about this particular episode, and to enjoy more episodes and to learn how Jay Scherr Business Consulting can help your business build a solid foundation. All you have to do is visit jscheerbusinessconsulting.com. And until next time, keep learning, keep growing, pick up a copy of Energize, and we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.
Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr, business consultant.
Jay Scherr. Jay Scherr Business Consulting.